Right, while this machine is getting off the ground, a couple of admin things. We need to finalize who's going to be on this practice project module. I know we've capped it at, I think it's 40. The list I've got from the LLM office suggests there's a lot more than 40. And what I need to know is who's doing this module, and to work that out, I need to know how you're faring at the seminars. And since I don't know who's on it, I'm going to just run through the list that I've got. Okay, here are the names, okay? And could you just raise your hand? And if I mispronounce your name, my apologies. First one is Kudryat Sef. Okay. Have you been to any of the seminars as yet? Okay. Next one is Lotai San. Have you been to any of the seminars? Okay. Is it Wyvens or Wevens? Okay. You've been to a seminar yesterday, right?
Yes, sir. Is it Jean? Because I didn't understand. Jean, like Jean spelled S. Wyvens, Jean.
Jean Ferdinand.
Yes.
I can actually pronounce French.
Yes.
Liu, and hang on, this is Shao Chu Liu. Have you been to any of the seminars? Yesterday. Did you present a paper? Okay. Okay, next one down. It's Mr. Oh God, I can't even see these things. Mr. Yang. Ian Yang. No signs. Oh, sorry, it's not Mr. It's Ms., obviously. I better get my glasses on. I'm reading it wrong. Okay. So I've got Yang. Is that you? No. So who's Yang? Lan Yang. Okay. Have you done any seminars? Did you present a paper? Okay. Mr. Rio Armando Gersang, I know where you are, somewhere. Okay. Yep. Okay. Yuhi Feng? Ms. Feng? Not even at the lecture. Okay. Woon, Clarence? Have you been to seminars? Okay. Zixiang Yang? No, not even at the lecture. Okay. By the way, this is something I've noticed. A lot of people are not turning up for lectures, and you're clueless at the seminars. Because, not you. It's okay. You don't have to make an apology. The point is that people think they can just read the book and come to class and do the seminars. You can't. Either follow the lecture. If you miss the lecture, for goodness sake, look at the darn lecture capture, okay? Because you can't do it any other way. Anyway, sorry. Zixiang Yang, is that you? I'm sorry? Great, I'll take your name off. De Batista, have you been to the seminars? Today, okay. Mr., oh no, it's not Mr., it's Charlotte Roy, is it Roy? Ray, hi. Have you been to the seminars? Did you present a paper? Okay. Larson? Larson, right. You were at the seminar last week, right?
No,
today. Okay. Oliveira? You been to the seminars? Did you present a paper? Okay. Mr. Islam? You've been and you presented papers, yes I know. Bezeha? Okay. Bradshaw? I'm trying to remember whether you've been to the seminars and... Okay. Did you present anything yesterday? Did you present a paper? You were sitting right in front, yeah, I know. Deng, Shiki Deng? No, not even at the lecture. Right, I mean it. Anyone not turning up for lectures and hoping to do a practice project, you can forget it. Zongyu Chiang? Sorry, am I getting it right? Oh, right. It's you. Are you doing Finance 3? Yes. Because you can't take the module, okay, unless you do at least Finance 3. Okay. Jing Chai? Chai?
Yes.
Ah, it's you, right, okay. Franchuk? Okay. Philippe Tonon? Okay. Jingyang Sun? Right, okay. Xiao Chu Liu? Sorry, am I getting the right person? It's Liu, L-I-U. First name is Xiaochu. Okay. It's you, not her. Sorry, so okay, what's your name and what's her name? Xiao Chu Liu. What's yours? Do you know your colleague with the same name? Not the same name. Yeah, but is your name the same or are we talking two different names?
Not the same. She is like Xiaoqianx.
Right. But you are Xiao Shu Liu.
Yeah.
Okay, right, fine, good. Right, next one down is Mr. or Ms. Luang Boriburana. Okay, right. Matthew Tugler?
Yes.
Mate Komara. Okay. Michael Leaf Povanesan? I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. No? No one knows who we go. Okay. Jing Chai? Why have you turned up twice on this list?
I'm eager to join the
Okay. Arno Gracio? Yeah, okay. Next one is Vasilio Puliu. You've been to seminars, no? Thomas Jacob? Yeah, you've been yesterday. Gianmarco Selva? Oh, okay, yes, you certainly have. Okay, this one, please correct my pronunciation. Leela Ratanakul? Have you been to seminars? Did you say anything? Okay. Next one down is Pak Dear Porn. Pak Dear Porn? Okay. You were at the seminar yesterday, I think. Were you at the seminar? Ectora Samis?
I have my seminar today.
Okay. Hanilo Dabai? You've been? Yeah. Okay. Soma Hida? Haida? Yeah, okay. I know you. Edwards Mate? Oh, it's you. Okay. Henri Boone? You've been, haven't you? Seminar? Yeah. Luang Boriburana? Oh, right, you were there yesterday, I think. Yeah. Maria Elena de Domenico? Yeah. Camila Gonsalves Colela? Am I getting the name right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, have you been at seminars?
Yes,
Last two?
last Tuesday.
Oh, last Tuesday, okay. Then there is Mohammed Suraj.
I'm not doing it though.
Oh, good. 'Cause less people doing it, the less people I need to take off this list. Chang Chang Liu? Unknown. Not here, okay. Next one is Romain Charles sorry, I'm going to get this one. Rihouey. Do you want to have a go at telling me how you pronounce it? Okay. Have you been to seminars before?
Yeah,
This week, last week. Did you present a paper? Okay. And last, I think the last one on the list, Lupi. Oh, you've been to seminars, I know. Right, now, next question I got to work out is there anybody who has thought, who thinks they have registered, but I have not called out your name? One. D. Can you say D for David or P for Peter? I can follow it.
Okay, D for David.
D for David. And the name is?
I need to spell it.
Yeah, please.
E for English, and N for night, G for girl.
Deng. Right. Let me see whether I can find Deng. Shi Chi Jeng? Okay, fine.
I want to change from the
Okay, I'll put your name down without guaranteeing that you're going to get a place, okay? All right. X S S I M A Y. Why don't you give me your name? I can probably write it. That one didn't work. Okay. Okay, so it's Simay. Alioglu after that. So there are two names there. You just gave me two names. Or is there one name? Two names. Alioglu is your family name. Okay, that's all. Okay. Right, good, thank you. Okay, I mean, hopefully we can sort this out by the end of this week. And, are you think you're registered and you didn't, okay. Sorry, what, give me your name again, full name. Guys, I'm finding it really difficult while you're discussing your Facebook photographs and your whatever and whatever. Give me a break, okay? I got to listen to people. I got to get their names right. I can't do it if you're all chatting to your neighbor. Thank you. Go slow. I need the family name, and if you just give me the first letter of the family name. Y-U? U-I? Yu-Hei Feng. Okay, right. Got it. Right. Anybody else who thinks they're asked to be registered and didn't hear their names called out? No, you're okay. Good. It's okay. Yes. I thought I called out your name. Yeah, okay, right, good. Right, we'll get this sorted out by the end of this week, okay? And you should know where things are. And by the end of this week, I'll also know whether this project finance mythical course is going to be on stream. How many of you actually will register for the project finance module if it comes on stream? Oh, good, not very many. It may not be there next year. I mean, we're finding it really difficult because, as you can see, I can't handle 4 modules on my own. And I'm the only finance law professor there is at King's to do this. There are corporate professors, but no finance. I can't do it on my own. I can't do 4 modules. I'm doing 4 times my scheduled workload at the moment. So I can't really do it next year. Absolutely not. I mean, this year, the only way I'm going to do it is if I'm getting 2 of my friends who are partners in one of the global law firms to help me out with the lectures. Otherwise, I can't do it. But you will be taught by this year, if you're taking it, by people who are partners in project finance. Either at Clifford's or Slaughter May or one of those places. Right, okay, yeah.
In case project finance runs.
I will tell you guys next week.
Yeah, but in case it does, and we cannot take it, but we are going to take Lloyd 1 and Lloyd 3.
Yep.
We have selected the practice module.
That's fine, that's enough.
That's fine.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Right, sorry about the mix-up on project finance, but that's the way these things work out. I was talking to people after seminars this week, and I thought the collected thoughts you guys have, I thought I'd just tell you what I think about your collective thoughts. In particular, one of the things that emerged from my chats with people from Tuesday and Wednesday, not Wednesday yet, Tuesday, and last week Wednesday, was this, that many of you guys, quite rightly, are hoping to work with the law offices of the global law firms. Not in London necessarily, but in Frankfurt or Singapore or Shanghai or Sao Paulo or wherever it is. But here's the catch. You've forgotten everything I said in lecture 1 and at the induction. Completely forgotten. What I said to you guys was there are 2 areas of work the global law firms do. 90% plus of their practice is in international financial markets, that's this stuff, and corporate. They don't do anything else. That message has somehow got lost. And those of you who are hoping to go work in a global law firm like Clifford Chance in Sao Paulo or in Mumbai or wherever, don't think it's going to help you very much if you turn up with modules which have absolutely no relevance to their practice. I'm not saying that you will be taken on if you do finance and corporate finance and private equity finance, no. But the point is these are horrendously competitive jobs. And I'm going to tell you from my own experience, as one of the recruitment partners for my global law firm at the time, the ratio, we used to take in 125 people per annum, new, and there were 3,600 qualified applicants. I mean not just on paper qualified, but qualified to be taken on. So you're not going to get in there unless, A, you get your modules in a ducks in a row, as we say, relevant stuff in there, and B, you've thought about something that is going to distinguish your resume from the next guy's. Look around you. Each one of the guys next to you, behind you, in front of you is as good as you are. Now, if you want a job, you've got to somehow work out what is it that you bring to the table. And I promise you, I've seen resumes usually somewhere in February, March, when it's far too late. People write down, for example, what they've done. LLM, King's College London. Below that, LLM in International Financial Law. How the hell would a partner in Sao Paulo, Clifford Chance, or Linklaters know what the heck LLM in International Financial Law means? You need to spell it out. What the heck did you cover? Did you do bonds? Did you do derivatives? Did you do securitizations? Okay? So when you're doing this stuff, for goodness sake, pay attention to what you're doing. You just can't put something together and send it out like shotgun pellets all over the place and hope someone's going to ring up and say, oh, wow, you're the best thing that happened since sliced bread. No, it's not going to happen that way, okay? You really need to concentrate on getting that resume right, and hopefully you'll get your modules right. Doing war studies or whatever and archery isn't going to get you through that. Someone said to me yesterday, oh, but they do take on people who have not even done these modules. Answer, yes. Very much so. But guess what? Where do you think those people get their degrees from? They're all Oxbridge. Take my word for it. It's an exception to the rule. Or Harvard or Columbia. Exception to the rule again. But I don't think, if you don't have that kind of label, that you're going to sail through immediately. So please try and think of this, because I know by February every year I look at a class and there's a pile of depressed faces. Why? Because they've put together totally useless resumes and shot it out all over the world and got ignored or got rejection after rejection after rejection. So I'm telling you now, this again, every year I do this. So it doesn't get too late for you to think about it. Okay? Over to you. Right. I mean, I'm sorry, I should have actually said this to you 3 times rather than once at the beginning of the year. But I did say to you in the beginning of the year, what are the law firms, global law firms doing? Please target your modules in that area if you want to go practice with them. Not in London, but in Frankfurt or in Tokyo or wherever. So there it is. I thought I'll tell you again. And this is where? November. Okay, done. Let's go back to where we were on syndicated loans. I was walking you through the structure of a syndicated loan agreement and looking at things like representations and warranties, conditions precedent, and financial terms. I think that's where I was. I was at items 1, 2, and 3, which I've completed. And on financial terms, I walked you through the various covenants: debt to equity, minimum net worth, current ratio, minimum working capital, and debt service ratio. And like I said, you don't need to know this stuff at all. You just need to be familiar with it. No one is ever going to ask you, what do you think about the debt to equity ratio? Absolutely not. Because you and I are totally ignorant on what that means and how it works, and how do you put a 1.5 rather than 1.8, okay? So you're not going to get into it. Please don't try, because you're just going to look idiotic. So we get over that one, and then we talked about the information covenant, which is a very powerful covenant enabling the lead banks, in particular the agent bank, to ask for information from the borrower about its financial performance, about its business strategy, about its management changes, whatever there is that the banks need to know. It's a very important covenant, and we'll come back to this at a later point in time. We're now going to get on to a number of other covenants, which I'm going to take you back to the list. So, okay, that. The reason I'm taking you back to the list is to make another point which I will go on repeating until it somehow gets across. This is an integrated set of modules, not a module, but a set of modules. If you don't understand week 4, for goodness sake, go back, look at the lecture capture and try to understand it, because if you don't understand week 3, you will not understand week 10. And here's an example of it. These are covenants: asset disposal, negative pledge, merger control, and pari passu, which I'm going to walk you through in this module. But this is relevant not just to syndicated loan agreements, it's relevant to bond issues, it's relevant to GDR issues, it's relevant to MTNs, it's relevant to derivatives, it's relevant to securitizations, and it's relevant to project financing, which comes on stream. These are across-the-board covenants. If you don't get it now, you're not going to get any of the other things I'm going to talk about when I talk about bonds, GDRs, MTNs, and whatever. So please, repeat myself. For the 45th time, don't think that you can silo these topics. Ignore one and deal with the other. It cannot be done. Okay? It's another repeat statement. So I'm going to get on to the first of these common covenants, which is the asset disposal covenant. Now, this asset disposal covenant, which you'll find in every syndicated loan agreement, every bond issue, and every other type of document in relation to international financial transaction, seeks to achieve control for the banks in respect of the transfer and disposal of revenue-generating assets. That's the concept. To prevent the disposal of revenue-generating assets. It doesn't seek to control transfer of assets, sale of assets, disposals, in the ordinary course of business. Why? Because if you are a hardware manufacturer for computers, well, you don't want to stop that corporate entity from selling the hardware. If you're a car manufacturer, you don't want to stop them from selling their cars or trucks. So you're dealing with Daimler-Benz, of course you don't want to stop them selling their trucks and their cars. What you're interested in the asset disposal covenant, is to stop Daimler-Benz or Hyundai or whoever it is from selling off their revenue-generating assets like plant and machinery. So that's really what this covenant is about. So two things about the drafting of the covenant. One, it's a prohibition on the disposal of revenue-generating assets, with an exception for ordinary course of business transfers. But importantly, the prohibition affects disposals over a specified period of time above a specified threshold. So, if you're dealing with Hyundai, for example, you would say there's a prohibition on disposal of revenue-generating assets which in total value exceeds $500 million, either in one disposal or a series of disposals over a period of, take a pick, 6 months, 1 year. You're trying to control not just a single large disposal of revenue-generating assets, but also a series of these transactions relating to sales and transfers of revenue-generating assets. And that's very important to understand, because I mean, it's very easy for a corporate entity not to dispose of something. If you impose, for example, a $500 million cap, to simply go on disposing $100 million each time and reach $1.5 billion in 6 months. To prevent that, you've got an asset disposal covenant which has got a cap which is applicable not just to a single transaction, but to a series of transactions over a specified period of time. Clear? But remember this exception for ordinary course of business, because that's what enables the corporate entity, whether it's an oil company or a car manufacturer, to carry on its ordinary business. Yeah. Somebody had a question. Yeah.
Does it apply to leases, licenses, not just...
I will come to that one shortly.
Sorry?
I'll come to that in a minute. Next comes a very powerful covenant, the merger control covenant. Now, what is the purpose of this one? When syndicate banks decide to lend, they are lending to a corporate entity with a particular business profile. You want to lend to a corporate entity which is, for example, very heavy, meaning has a huge amount of business in petrochemicals, for example, in South America. Or you're lending to a biochemical company in Southeast Asia. Now, what you want is to ensure that that corporate profile is maintained throughout the life of the loan. Because what you don't want to see happen is that a corporate entity which you thought was a petrochemical producer merges with a car manufacturer which is twice its size and now becomes a car manufacturing company. No, you don't want that, because your analysis done by your internal rocket scientists has said, no, we have to stay out of the car sector over the next 5 years, because until electric cars hit the streets, no one's going to buy these cars. So you need to be able to, you meaning the banks, need to be able to control the change in the business profile of this corporate entity. And that's done by, first of all, by preventing mergers. The problem, however, for the lawyer, not for the bankers, because they say, look, we just don't want these mergers to happen. We need to be able to agree or disagree to a merger. For lawyers, that's not an easy task, because the merger in the context of the markets that we're looking at is inevitably going to be transnational, trans-jurisdictional. So how do you define a merger without knowing exactly which jurisdictions are involved? Consequently, what one has to do is to think about the practicalities of merger. Usually, in practice, across the globe, in developed jurisdictions, if a merger occurs between one major corporate entity and another corporate entity in that jurisdiction or somewhere else, the usual structure is that one or more of those two entities ceases to exist or gives rise to a third corporate entity with the liquidation of the original entities, exactly as you saw in the Greek bank cases. Remember them? Okay, if you have forgotten them, go back to them. Right? Therefore, that is one approach to the drafting of this covenant. So, clause 1 of the merger control covenant will say, I've forgotten my pointer, Borrower shall not merge or otherwise amalgamate with another corporate entity or company or engage in a transaction which would result in the borrower ceasing to exist as a corporate entity under applicable law. Now, legally, of course, if the borrower ceases to exist as a matter of the corporate law of incorporation of the borrowing entity, what happens? Just think again. What happens? Stuck again. Okay, how many times have we talked about the Greek bank cases? 3 times, 4 times, 5 times? So what happens? Has anybody remembered what the heck I'm talking about when I said Greek bank cases? If you have remembered it, you want to raise your hand and tell me what you make of it, please. Greek Bank A and Greek Bank B were merged to produce Greek Bank C with the liquidation of Greek Bank A and Greek Bank B, right? One line. That's what happened in the Greek bank case. That is exactly what this clause is seeking to control. A merger or amalgamation or similar corporate transaction which results in your borrower ceasing to exist as a corporate entity in consequence of the merger. Yeah. One by one, just one by one. This is case 1, where this merger occurs, and then what happens? What you've got is a new entity, which under the Greek bank cases analysis becomes your borrower. If the succession, universal succession happens, then your new borrower is the new corporate entity. So to prevent that, you've got a clause saying, no, you can't do the Greek bank structure, because one entity will cease to exist. Therefore, you, the borrower, cannot engage in that transaction. But to understand how this works in practice, and this probably goes into your question as well, how does it work in practice? Well, once again, because of the nature of mergers being multi-jurisdictional, all that one can do is to look at merger structures that are used in practice across the developed world. I'm sure someone's going to raise a hand and say, but there is this structure and that structure, but I'm talking about the more common, usual structures that are used in the developed economies to merge corporations. And we need to then look at those structures and work out how does this clause work in relation to these structures. The most common form of structure is the Greek bank structure. You've got Corporation A and Corporation B, which are going to be merged. All the assets and liabilities are going to be transferred to a new corporate entity, Corporation C, and then A and B Corporation are liquidated, with the shareholders in A and shareholders in B getting shares in C. I'll let you think about it. Don't photograph it, it's in my book, the diagram. No colors, but the diagram is there. So, that's the commonest form of merger structure across developed economies. Once A and B have been liquidated, only C exists. And as you know from the rulings in cases like the Greek bank cases, your new borrower is C Corporation. You don't have an option. That is your borrower, unless you have something to prevent this happening. And that's why you got this clause. Question, does this clause stop this merger? It doesn't. Somebody said no. Why? Who's your borrower in this example? Let's say B or indeed A, it doesn't matter. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Yeah. C is the new borrower. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's all agreed, because that's not the result of the clause, that's the result of corporate law, yeah? Universal succession. My question is, does that clause imposed on your borrower, A corporation or B corporation, whichever, prevent that borrower from engaging in this transaction. Yeah. Sorry, I'm missing something here. It does or doesn't fall within the control clause? We know the merger is controlled, the structure, the effects, etc., are controlled by the law of the place of incorporation. In this case of A corporation and B corporation. Supposing A corporation is your borrower. My question is, does that clause stop A corporation, your borrower, from engaging in this transaction? Doesn't matter what law is to which it is subject as a matter of the law of incorporation. Yes, please. Sorry, say that again.
Yes, it does. Literally within the law, it's the court then ceases to exist whether it's A or B, C. So you can use on that.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, that's what I'm
Okay.
So as long as the borrower is still there, it's fine.
As long as the borrower is there.
It doesn't cease to exist.
Hang on. I'm losing it. In this structure, your borrower is either A or B. Let's say it's A corporation. Okay, so apply the clause.
Okay, so they both are in a version 2 on which is corporation CA.
Okay, I'll repeat it again. All the assets of and liabilities of A, all the assets and liabilities of B are transferred to C. The two remaining shells, A corporation and B corporation, are liquidated, with the shareholders being given shares, shareholders are in A and shareholders in B being given shares in C. Okay, question. Does that clause control it? Prevent it from happening? Yes, you said, yeah. Somebody up there said no.
I think it's no, just like method plus damages if
Damages. I won't do damages. If this happens and you're here, what would you do? You're not going to start getting damages. What would you do?
or maybe just ask for the rebate.
Okay, that's one way of putting it. Yes, do you want to come in?
What if the borrower is defined as the corporation A or any company, so C, and in this case,
Then you don't have a problem.
but if the borrower is defined as A, then
I don't think you will see drafting which says, my borrower is A or anybody who succeeds to A. It'll be nuts. You'd have converted a major corporate entity which produces luxury cars into a corporate entity which is merged now and is doing cloning of Dolly the sheep. Don't think banks want that. So you would have a definition of borrower as corporation A. Stop. That's why, remember now, go back, tie this all in. That's why representation and warranty condition precedent, what is it? Corporate status of the borrower. Give me your constitutional documents, you represent and warrant, this is your status, you're incorporated in Kazakhstan and your status is as follows, and you represent and warrant as follows. Why all that? Because you're concerned with that particular borrower. And you're not going to say, yeah, we'll lend to you and anybody else. You don't. So the straight answer is yes, you are right. It immediately prevents this from occurring. Now, I know somebody wanted to talk about damages, but no, you're not going to do damages. I think I mentioned this very briefly. What is the remedy for a breach of covenant? Or breach of representation and warranty that we've looked at? Somebody said something. Absolutely. It's a default. We'll come to default shortly, but just to give you a simple taste of it, it's a default. And default means something else, which I've mentioned many times in the early lectures, cross default. If the bank's called default on a borrower, it triggers cross default clauses. The borrower is in default under every loan agreement, every bond issue that it's party to in these markets, it goes into insolvency, full stop. That's the power of the cross-default clause. Therefore, the remedy is not running around suing people in court. The remedy is in the syndicated loan agreement. It's the default clause and the threat of cross-default, which means that the borrower goes into insolvency immediately. So that's why I keep on saying, get away from this, I'm going to court and I'm going to start suing, thinking. That's not the way these SLAs are structured. The nuclear button is right inside the SLA. You can destroy a corporate entity overnight if you want it. Okay, moving on. That's structure one. Structure two, sorry. Okay, back again. Who would want to ask a question? Yeah, please do.
The question was, can the clause prevent the merger?
Can the,
If the clause can prevent the merger.
yeah,
But I think by law it can't just in practice, because in practice it will prevent it because it,
sorry, I'm going to go try and understand what you're saying. In practice, you say
in practice
it can't be done.
prevent it because otherwise it will cause default. But by law they could still merge. You can't just
They can merge, but the moment this structure goes ahead, one step beyond, and the syndicate banks have a right to press the button, default.
yeah.
And what happens if A corporation goes into insolvency? Do you think B would want to merge with an insolvent corporation? Yes?
They wouldn't,
Yeah.
I get it now.
Good. How you get it? Good. I'm glad you're thinking this through, because this is what you need to do. You need to think through how these are structured in the context of real life practicality. I mean, many people's minds ran to statutes, legislation about corporations and mergers, that is allowed. Of course it is. The point is, you enter the market, you're told, no, you can't do it, except with the consent of the banks. Yeah.
The SLAs have sort of lender's consent or prior consent.
You don't really need it, because if corporation A wants to engage in a merger with B, without any question, once the announcement is made, you can't go and divulge insider information. Once the announcement is made, you will go to your banks and say, hi guys, and don't forget it's not just one syndicate. For major corporations, there'll be at least 10, 15 syndicates, exactly. They'll have to say, can we talk? We need to merge. Are you agreeable or no? Banks would usually not have any concern unless, as I said, you're converting your massive car manufacturer into a biotech company producing cloned sheep. So, therefore, the anti-merger provision is something that the banks can use if they so wish, if the merger is not to their liking. Right, so that is case one. The case two is this one. Another type of merger, where let's supposing your borrower is A. Borrower is A. All of the borrower's assets and liabilities are transferred to corporation B, its merger partner. And then shares in B are issued to the shareholders of A, after which A corporation is to be liquidated. Question, does the clause catch it? Yes, absolutely. The test of, is your borrower ceasing to exist? Answer, absolutely yes. Therefore, this too would be caught, and this too would be a breach on the part of A of its SLA obligations. Okay, so that's merger structure 2. Merger structure 3. Your borrower is A. All its assets and liabilities are transferred to B. All its assets and liabilities are transferred to B. And in return, that purchase of assets and liabilities is made by B Corporation issuing shares in B to A Corporation. So A becomes a shareholder in B Corporation. It's a shell company holding shares in B. How many of you have done corporate law, by the way? Have you covered all this stuff? Mergers, merger structures, acquisition structures? Yep, I thought so. This is where our problems lie, because I can tell you this from my own experience. I'd done a hotshot company law course at Oxford. I went into my law firm and I thought, hey, I know everything there is to know about company law. The first thing that landed on my desk was somebody said, hey, we're doing an IPO next week. Can you do the work on that one? I looked blankly. I hadn't even heard about what the hell was an IPO. Never mind the structure of an IPO. And that's where the problem lies. Unless you get information, knowledge in university or somewhere else about this kind of stuff, going into a law firm without that knowledge is a huge drawback. And that's why I thought, hey, wouldn't it be a good idea to tell everybody about bonds, loans, derivatives at a university? And here I am. Anyway, merger structure 3. Transfer of all assets and liabilities from A to B. All that has happened is A becomes a shareholder in B Corporation. It receives shares from B Corporation as consideration for the transfer of assets and liabilities, all its assets and liabilities. So what happens now is A Corporation continues to exist. It simply holds shares in B Corporation, and A Corporation's shareholders still continue to hold shares in A. That's it. Test, has the borrower ceased to exist? Answer, no, and you're absolutely right. The clause does not bite. So how do you prevent this one? Well done, yes. The asset disposal covenant would catch it immediately. So it's not the merger covenant which would control this structure, it's the asset disposal covenant. Yeah, good. Everybody understood that? Okay. Next category, and I put this into one category, although there are different forms of it. How many of you are doing private equity? Have you come across buyouts as yet? Not yet. Okay. Not yet. Okay, fine. You'll probably get to it soon. There are two forms of takeovers that we need to look at here. Your borrower, again, is A Corporation. And what happens here is that another corporate entity, let's take the takeover scenario first. B Corporation. How many of you are doing regulation of mergers and takeovers? Wow, okay. Useful things to know when you want to march into Clifford Chance, Sao Paulo, or Singapore. Anyway, the takeover. The takeover structure. Do you have a question? The takeover structure is a situation where what Americans call a tender offer. There's nothing tender about it, but that's what it's called in the US. It's a nasty business. In this part of the world, we call it a takeover offer. A corporation like B would come in and make an offer to the shareholders of your borrower, A Corporation. The offer is, we'd like to buy all your shares, either for cash or for cash plus shares in my company, B Corporation. Now, if that offer succeeds and the shareholders of B Corporation accept that offer, the result of that transaction would be what? Just so that I keep you thinking. What is the result of B Corporation buying up all of the shares in A Corporation from the shareholders of A Corporation? Yes. A would immediately become a subsidiary of B. There's another consequence. We're talking the global markets. Most corporate entities entering this global market for syndicated loans, bonds, other than state corporations, would be companies listed on major stock exchanges. This would result immediately in the delisting of this corporation. So there are two consequences. One, it becomes a subsidiary, and secondly, it loses its public standing as a listed company on a major stock exchange. Frankfurt, shall we say, or Singapore. Why are the banks concerned with this? Why would they be concerned with it? Yeah.
Because exchanges have listing requirements.
Well, it's more than the listing. This is your borrower has now become a subsidiary of another company. Why are you concerned with it?
Change corporate identity, you require subsidiary work as a primary company, and now the B corporation has oversight of a change management.
It can do one heck of a lot once A corporation, your borrower, becomes a subsidiary of B corporation. Your loan continues to A. But because it's now a subsidiary of B corporation, B controls A in the sense it can sack its entire management, as it usually does. 2, it can asset strip, i.e. take out the valuable assets of A corporation and wing it out somewhere. Those are the concerns that the banks would have. Consequently, a takeover is something that the banks are concerned with. Now, insofar as the assets in A corporation are going to be stripped out and sold, transferred, the asset disposal covenant binding on A would kick in, yes. But everything else, change in corporate structures, change in management structures, change in business profile, nothing. You can't control it. Consequently, of course the banks are concerned with the takeover. Now, this is going to happen in a buyout scenario where, like a hedge fund would come in or a vulture fund would come in and buy out the shareholders of A and make it not necessarily a subsidiary, but part of a fund which this hedge fund is running. I don't want to get into that because that gets a little bit more complicated. I'm just going to stay with the takeover structure because you're already having difficulty understanding a takeover structure. I don't want to go and look at how hedge funds operate in relation to these corporations. Just stay with the takeover. Buyout, I'm sure you work it out when you do private equity. But till then, let's just stay with the takeover. So we've come to the conclusion that it's of concern to the banks. Your clause up here doesn't catch it, does it? Does it? No, because your borrower, Corporation A, continues to exist. It has not been liquidated. But a transaction has occurred which is of concern to the banks because its borrower's management could be on the street tomorrow with their Lehman Brothers cardboard boxes. Did you ever see that? Yeah, those of you saw it. That's what I'm referring to. Everybody was flung out and everybody came out to the street carrying little cardboard boxes with their worldly possessions to come back. How do we control this? The merger control clause that we looked at previously doesn't work, doesn't affect this transaction. So you need another clause. Another clause which focuses on that point I made earlier, the delisting on the exchange. It says, borrower shall ensure that it continues to be a company listed on the exchange or exchanges on which it is listed, as at the date of this SLA, and that it will not be delisted under the rules of such exchanges due to a purchase of all or some of the shares in the borrower by a third party. Have a look at that clause, think about it a little bit, and then go back to the structure and tell me, does it catch it? Please try and think this through. I'd rather you became a lawyer than a photographer. Nope, falls on deaf ears again. Taking this photograph isn't going to help you understand this. If you think this one through by reference to the clause and the structure, you will understand. Yes, please. Wait, the scenario 1 was for all of the shares. Okay, well, let's go step by step. If a delisting occurs, this clause catches it. Now, scenario A in practice is if all of the shares are purchased, then it's clear delisting. Your point? But what if all of the shares are not purchased? What happens then? The straight answer is, in order for a takeover to be effective, a certain level of purchase has got to be achieved by the bidder. If you compare the level of control that a bidder needs to take over this company and become its owner, you will see there's a close alignment between that percentage and the percentage of shares which must be in public ownership for the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, the Tokyo Stock Exchange, the London Stock Exchange, the NYSE, to continue with the listing of a corporate entity. And that's why this clause works. Because even if the bidder, Corporation B in our example, does not buy and is not able to buy all of the shares, if it buys up to and beyond the threshold under applicable corporate law, which enables B to say to A, you are my subsidiary, it can have the power to compel sale by minority shareholders of the shareholding in A corporation. Unfortunately, these are the things that you would have probably understood if you were doing corporate finance or regulation or conduct of mergers and acquisitions rather than some of the other crazy subjects you're doing. I said this to you at the beginning of the year. Remember, don't tell me I didn't tell you. This is a set of modules which work together, and in practice you need them to understand one and the other. Archery, war studies, quantum mathematics is not going to help you. Anyway, come back to what we're talking about. So, there it is. You control it through a clause which goes into which refers to and relies on the delisting of a public corporation because of a takeover. The same happens in a buyout. If you can just remember that, and you can work out what is a buyout and how they work when you're doing private equity with who's doing it this year? Chris Brown. Okay. So that's essentially how one controls mergers. Now, let's just think just a step further, okay? There's this clause which says if you're getting into a transaction which is going to result in your delisting, that would be a breach of the SLA. Question now, let's think through the practicalities. How does this work? Bidder comes along and says, German corporate entity, massive Daimler-Benz, turns up and says, right, I'm making a bid for you. Your borrower, your syndicate's borrower. The shareholders have indicated that they would sell. What do you do? Or do you wait until then even? I think you're absolutely right in pinpointing that if you are the subject of a bid, then you would need to go and tell your lenders, this is what's happening. I've got no control over it, because if you're the management, the directors of A, you've got no control over this. This is a transaction occurring between B Corporation and the shareholders in A. You've got no control. Therefore, you go to the banks and say, this is happening, and if it goes ahead, we will be in breach of your SLA covenant. What do we do? Answer, the banks will pick up the phone to A B Corporation and say, hi, we're the syndicate, talk to us. Because if you don't, we call a default on B, on A. Triggering cross default, triggering insolvency, and you, B Corporation, will be buying a dead insolvent company for worth 2.5 cents. Therefore, B Corporation will come to the table, if the bank so wanted. So I think that's what I was trying to make you understand the practicalities, how these things work. See how the lawyers are doing now? It's a different role that you're playing. You're not running off into court, suing for damages, blah, blah, blah. Yeah?
Wouldn't this case
Well, it could be that the directors of A are engineering the buyout with the help of a fund. Okay, it doesn't matter. Let's say a fund is buying out. I think you're going to have to speak up. Your colleagues cannot hear. They might be able to, but don't forget, first of all, if you're a hedge fund or a venture fund or a venture capital fund and you want to do a buyout, you will need huge amount of finance to buy out the interests of all of the shareholders of A. Where are you going to get the money for it? You're not going to put up your own money. You go to another syndicate of banks and say, this is what we're going to do. Can you lend money? Now, what the banks would usually do is that they would do what is called margin lending, which involves the bank saying, okay, whatever shares you get, you pledge to us to secure this loan, and we'll fund it. But anyway, that's for later. But the question is what? It doesn't in any way affect the workings of the clause. The clause works. There would be a delisting. Sorry, no, I'm sorry. Is that what you said? Not that it doesn't say it will not be delisted. Have a look. It doesn't say you're not going to get delisted. It says you got to ensure that you continue to be a company listed on an exchange. And therefore, if you're engaging in a transaction which may, not will, may result in delisting, you'd better start talking to your banks. I think this is the point that your colleague made. Because otherwise, you will end up in breach, you'll be in default. The shareholders in A will be holding shares worth 2 pence, and the bidder will simply walk away and say, I don't want to buy a bankrupt company. I think you need to that's why I keep, now that we are into our 4th week, 5th week, we need to slowly get away from damages, litigation, lawyers in wigs, and all that rubbish. They don't get paid much. You want to get paid, you do this stuff. I'm joking. And there it is. This is the kind of transaction where you have to think practically. You have to work through the law, the legal structures, without running to court and causing chaos. You need to achieve an objective, and in this case, it's to stop the merger. It's not that difficult if you've got a clause like this. It's a threat of default and cross-default, which will stop it dead in its tracks. Okay, moving on. Any questions? Sorry, yes, please do.
Can't they just merge at 75%? We do 25%.
Yes, they can. I think that was your colleague's question as well. Of course they can. They can buy 75%, but there are laws which now kick in at that point, which either requires that they make an offer for the remaining minority of shares, that's some jurisdictions, compulsory offer for minority, if they're only buying 75. And secondly, that minority shareholders are compelled to sell into that offer. That's what some law systems will tell you. And thirdly, the 25% that's not bought may not be sufficient to keep the company listed. Some jurisdictions will require at least 30% of the shares on exchange, otherwise you get delisted. So there's a whole range of laws that come into play in relation to a scenario which your colleague also thought about, namely what happens if you buy less than that. That depends on A, the corporate law applicable to the corporate entity which is being taken over, and B, the rules on the exchanges or exchange on which it is listed. But from your perspective, you're not going to wait for all that. What you want to do is say, wait a minute, do we want this merger takeover to go ahead or don't we? If it's Daimler-Benz being taken over by a cloning of sheep company, well, of course you'll be bloody concerned. You'll want to stop it dead in its tracks. Yeah.
The discourage the merger.
Sorry, do.
Yeah. In order to discourage the merger, to avoid the merger, can the borrower
Well done. Yes, of course, you're right. You're absolutely right. I'm not going to talk through poison pills because that is exactly the kind of thing which you should have been doing in your corporate law courses, which I understand none of you are doing. So, of course it is. Of course it is. But you see, in a sense, this is a poison pill. It triggers default in the borrower, making the merger impossible to proceed with on the part of B, the bidder. So it's a basic one. There are lots of others, but that's not, unfortunately, part of this course. And I'm not going to do a course on takeovers and mergers as well. But it's a fun area. Take my word for it. It's great fun. Yeah, please do. Exchange rate is oh, I see what you're thinking about. You just get 50.05% of the borrower, and that means that theoretically it is a subsidiary. Question whether, in practice, whether someone would want to go ahead with it, because ultimately these are driven by commercial objectives. Why are you buying 50.05%? Think about it. I mean, you're thinking about a very rare scenario, but yes, theoretically it can happen, and theoretically again, you need not be delisted on the stock exchange because you do have 49.05% on the stock exchange. Yeah, in that scenario, no, this will not catch it. You're absolutely right. Any other thoughts, comments? Right. So that's the merger control covenant. It just basically, to summarize, there are two things you're trying to control. One is a corporate merger with the result that your borrower ceases to exist. And case two that you want to control is where your borrower becomes a subsidiary of another corporate entity. Both of which you don't like, you as banks do not like, and you need to control. Those are the clauses which help you do it. And you work through the structure in that way. The one in between, where the borrower does not cease to exist, but all its assets are transferred, is not caught by these covenants, it's actually caught by the asset disposal covenant. So you need to work with these as a sort of portfolio of weapons to control what the borrower is doing. Any questions before I move on? Anything? But I do wish some of you guys did some of this stuff because it's going to be seriously useful out there. But anyway, that's another story. Next. Yep.
So if the merger is recommended, I mean, in terms of like price-earning ratio, valuation multiple, so, and the parties agree with the cross-default clause, how can you avoid the default, the automatic default?
There won't be an automatic default. When we come to default, that's one of the things that you will see, we never have an automatic default clause. Never. Exactly for the kind of reason you're thinking about. Gosh, this could trigger automatic default. No. Yeah? Okay. Right, next one down. The negative pledge clause. Now, somebody asked me a question about this yesterday or a day before about negative pledge. Was it you?
No, I asked about lease and license.
No, not lease and license. Negative pledge clause. No? Okay. Right. This clause, in summary, prohibits the borrower from giving security interests over its assets or the assets of any of its subsidiaries, in broad brush. Reason for this clause, which is all pervasive in the markets, meaning it's in every finance document, be it a bond issue, be it a loan, be it a derivative, be it anything, is very straightforward. The entire market works on the basis of unsecured lending. Remember? Right. Because all lending is unsecured, whether by way of syndicated loans, whether by way of bonds or whatever, you need a structure which prevents the granting of asset security by borrowers in the marketplace. That mechanism is the negative pledge clause. The negative pledge clause seeks to ensure that all creditors remain unsecured, that all assets remain unsecured, and so in an insolvency of the borrowing entity, the assets will be available to all lenders rather than to secured lenders. It also achieves another thing. When a major corporation gets into financial difficulty and its financial performance begins to deteriorate substantially, it still needs to borrow funding in the markets. And borrowers then find that funding is drying up alongside its deteriorating financial performance. The only way it can now borrow substantial amounts of funding is on a secured basis. The negative pledge clause in SLAs will stop that from happening. They cannot borrow on a secured basis simply because their financial performance is deteriorating. So that's the background. What does it look like, the clause? That's a sample provision clause, which is used by many a global law firm. It doesn't track the language of the LMA master, by the way, but this is another draft. What it says, borrower will not, so obligation on the borrower, and second, and will procure that none of its subsidiaries, it applies to borrower, and through the borrower to its subsidiaries, will procure that none of its, will create or permit to subsist. Now remember, there are two phrases here. You will not create something, nor will you permit it to subsist, i.e. continue, if it now exists. And what is it? Any mortgage, charge, lien, or other encumbrance or security interest. The key phrase is or any security interest. On, and here's the next bit you need to focus on all or any part of the present property or any future property of the borrower. So this is a multifaceted prohibition. It applies to the borrower and through the borrower to its subsidiaries, because the borrower is required to make sure that the subs don't actually create security interest. It applies in relation to all or part of the assets of the borrower and these subsidiaries. It applies to present assets and future assets. It's a blanket prohibition. Now, when I tell you that, it's blindingly obvious that you can't leave it like that. Because there's a whole number of problems in relation to the creation of security interests. While you certainly want to prohibit the giving or creation or permitting to subsist security interests, some are inevitable. And I've just put down a few of these. The most common, the smallest of them, is security interest arising by operation of law in most jurisdictions. I mean, don't forget, it's multi-jurisdictional borrower. You could find that transactions which are not intended to create security do create security. Give me a blindingly simple example. Your corporate jets go in for servicing with a jet service company. Bill is sent to your aircraft service department in your corporation, your borrower. The guy who pays the bills is on holiday for 3 weeks in Koh Samui in Thailand or in Rio in Brazil. Doesn't get paid, just sits there. What happens to it once the period of payment, the time for which payment is permitted, expires? Answer: in most law systems, a lien, a charge, a security interest is created for the benefit of the repair of the jets over the jets themselves. Would that breach the negative pledge clause? Absolutely. You will not create or permit to subsist any security interest, and you just allowed it to happen. So yes, that kind of thing happens all the time. Do the banks want to prohibit it? Not really. So we've got to start thinking about how do we exempt that. Then there is commercial practice in real life where security interests are quite routinely created, essential for commerce. Those of you who are doing international trade law, anybody who does international trade law? Yeah, you would know about letters of credit and the security interest created under letters of credit over the bills of lading, the shipping documents, and the cargoes that are shipped across the globe. That you cannot do without creating a security interest, and you will not get your cargo shipped unless you actually allow that to happen. Therefore, it's a security interest arising in the ordinary course of business. That's one example. Another example. There are jurisdictions in which you can buy goods from a corporate entity, a crane for digging oil or whatever, and instead of the transfer of the ownership and title to that crane being transferred to the buyer, you retain title, you the seller, until payment, the full amount, is paid. Question, does that need to be exempted? So there are questions of market commercial practice which needs to be addressed in relation to this negative pledge clause. Then there's also the problem, absolutely common, that when you impose a negative pledge obligation on the borrower, it may already have existing security interests. How? Why? Because most corporations start as domestic corporations initially. And domestic corporations in real life practice across the globe give security over assets to local banks in order to obtain financing. They should have got rid of those security interests as they become a major transnational corporation, but some haven't. Some don't. The other one that you've got to think about as a matter of practicality is that major global corporations who are going to be your borrower usually purchase other companies as subsidiaries. That's not a problem. But when they purchase a subsidiary, that subsidiary may have existing security interests in relation to its assets. And your clause prohibits that subsidiary that you've just bought from having any security interest over its assets. So, how do we deal with it? Sorry, do you have a question? That what? I'm going to get to it. This is just the easy bit, where the transaction that we're talking about does in fact create a clear security interest. But these are things that happen as a matter of ordinary business and commerce, and no bank wants to stop it because otherwise you will stop this borrower from doing business. So the way it's dealt with is that all of these things that we referred to earlier, existing security interests, interests arising under letters of credit, security interests arising by operation of law, will be permitted as an exception to the negative pledge clause. As an appendix, it says, negative pledge clause shall not apply to the following transactions, but subject to a cap, i.e. a maximum. The banks will say, we don't want the total amount of security interest, whether by way of existing security interest, whether by way of letters of credit, to exceed X $100 million. That enables the borrower to do things in the ordinary way that everybody else does without breaching the negative pledge clause. It's a simple, straightforward exception created in an appendix. In order to understand, hang on, the next question, you've got to understand the operations of a borrower, which are transnational in 14 different jurisdictions, all with their own rules and laws governing security interests. So what might not constitute a security interest under the governing law may constitute a security interest at the place where the asset is located, an oil field, a tanker, a fleet of aircraft, whatever. So what law controls? I told you this. You've forgotten your conflict of laws, the stuff that we talked about. Go back and listen to those lectures on lecture capture.
If I'm not wrong, it's a limitation of insulation. So
A limitation of,
insulation, I mean, it's not the governing law, it's govern security interests. I mean, it's
okay, what does?
where the asset is located, arrowhead.
It's a lex situs, isn't it? It's the place where the asset is located. So as a lawyer, it's very easy, the answer. Lex situs, you say. So if a transaction is occurring in Brazil, another one in Kazakhstan, you'll say, okay, under Brazilian law and Kazakh law, that's how it works. That's easy. If it's a fixed asset, as an oil field, an oil pipeline, a factory. Well, what about other things? Okay, movable equipment that people are using for example, mining equipment, lex situs again, because it's a tangible movable. But then you get into the more difficult areas. The most difficult is intangible movables. What the heck are intangible movables? Well, there are things like shares, bonds, bank deposits, which are assets, investments of the borrower. Why are they difficult to pinpoint? Because in a modern context, unlike in grandmother's day or grandfather's day, you didn't get a share certificate and put it under your mattress anymore. All of this stuff now, investments are held electronically, on electronic accounts. Question, what is the location of hundreds of millions of dollars of share certificates? Hundreds of millions of dollars of bullion certificates, which is an investment in gold, obviously. I mean, nobody buys gold and carries it home. They're held in vaults and you buy certificates. What exactly is the lex situs of what you have bought? Well, I'm not going to give you the answer right now. We'll have to think about it. But there lies a fundamental problem that you need to think about. But the starting point of the discussion is not the governing law, it's something else. And that something else is the lex situs. Easy to say, but difficult to apply outside fixed assets and tangible movables. There's another category called what lawyers call ambulatory assets, like ships and aircraft. What law controls them? Because they're moving all the time. That's why they're called ambulatory, meaning they're moving. Well, luckily for everybody concerned, ships and aircraft are required by law to have a registration in some jurisdiction. That would be the jurisdiction whose laws would decide whether a security interest has been created over a ship or an aircraft. So the lex situs there would be the law, the flag as we call it, or the law of place of registration. But so on and so forth. There's a whole pile of things that one has to look at in order to work out whether a security interest has been created, and it's not the governing law, it's something else, it's the lex situs of the asset in question, okay? Starting point. Then we've got another problem which is different. So far, we've talked about the creation of security interest over assets, actual security interest, and we've worked out what law. Then comes the problem of, I'll stop. Till you gather your breath, send your Instagram message with a photograph of the lecture theatre and your colleague next to you. Once you're done, tell me, I'll carry on. Done? Okay, good. Nope. Still time for Instagram. Are we done on Instagram? Okay, good. A number of transactions are entered into by most major corporations, which are quite common commercially, but which do not, under the standard governing laws in the market, New York law and English law, actually give rise to security interests. I'm just going to mention a couple of them. Not all, I can't go through all of them. I'm just going to go through a few, but this is something that you need to think about carefully when you're drafting a negative pledge clause. Sale and repurchase transactions. Sale and leaseback transactions. And receivable sales subject to recourse. I bet you haven't come across them before, have you? If you have, great. But if not, I'll just walk you through them very quickly. In a sale and repurchase transaction, what happens is that a buyer wishing to buy something pretty large, an oil rig, for example, would obtain financing from a bank to engage in this transaction, whereby it obtains the financing by selling to the bank the asset it has bought. The consideration being the loan for the asset. So the funds will go, unfortunately I haven't got my thing today, but it goes from the bank to your borrower, which is the seller to the bank of the oil rig, but in fact is the purchaser of the oil rig from some other corporate entity, and it uses the loan funds to pay its seller of the oil rig. Sale one. Easy bit. And then the borrower agrees, your borrower, agrees with this other bank or banks to repurchase the asset which it has sold to the bank that we are talking about, the new bank. I hope you can enter your never mind, rather than what I'm talking about. It's unbelievable how many guys spend on their mobile phones. You can't be doing lecture notes. Anyway, what is the problem here? The borrower has agreed to buy back the oil rig in 5 years' time at a specified price, namely the same as the sale price, the original sale price. And in the meantime, it is agreed to pay sums of money to the bank during the period of the repurchase that we've agreed is, what did we say, 5 years? Yeah. What is the borrower and this bank achieved by this transaction, do you think? It's got a loan, that's for certain, right? But it has done something else. It's transferred the oil rig, which it has bought, with the financing to the bank which provided the financing. Has it granted a security interest to that bank? Applying English or New York law, the answer is no. There has been no grant of a security interest. Is it of concern to your syndicate? Of course it is. Why? Because this is exactly the same as getting a loan on the basis of asset security. Why? Because the bank which has provided the lending to buy the oil rig has now got title to the oil rig. It's even better than security. That's a sale and repurchase structure. You can do the same thing with what is called a sale and leaseback, where instead of an agreement to repurchase the asset. You sell the asset to the bank for the loan that you want, and then you agree to lease it back from the bank to use it in oil exploration. Title to asset with the bank. All that your borrower has got is a right to use it. For how much? For an agreed price. Now, if you look at the agreed price and the repurchase price, you'll see something very interesting. It is exactly what it would have paid if it was borrowing the funds outright. It's called a fee or a commission for the lease of the oil rig, but if one looks at it as a loan subject to interest, that is exactly what is happening. That is the commercial substance. Now, English and New York law have clearly said no. As far as our law systems are concerned, this is a sale and lease back. What is written is what is written. We are not looking at the commercial objective, the commercial purpose, blah, blah, blah. Which creates an issue with regard to sale and lease back, sale and repurchase type transactions. Because the question for the banks is very simple. These transactions are creating interest over assets for the benefit of new lenders. So far as the syndicate banks are concerned, yes, we need to control it. How do we do it? Answer is very straightforward. It's an extended negative pledge clause. Remember this clause here, that one that we were talking about earlier? The borrower will not and will procure, none of his subsidiaries will create or permit to subsist any mortgage charge or lien or other encumbrance or security interest. Clause goes on to say, security interest shall include the following transactions: sale and repurchase, sale and leaseback, and a whole number of other things. Sale and assignment of receivables with recourse, a whole raft of things which banks will want. Subject, as usual, to a requirement that for these transactions to fall within the negative pledge prohibition, they need to exceed a particular threshold. I mean, you're not going to be concerned with a $100 million purchase of some crane or rig or something like that. So once it goes beyond that 100 million mark, banks start getting worried. Consequently, you would expect to see a clause which extends the negative pledge clause to transactions of sale and leaseback, lease and leaseback, which in total value over 1 year or 6 months exceeds in total value X $100 million. Same format as we did with the asset disposal covenant, i.e. you aggregate the transactions and say you cannot exceed that. Yeah?
Aren't this transaction already contained in the asset disposal?
It could be, is the answer. It could be. This is not so much about whether or not it falls within the asset disposal covenant. It is about trying to control a different set of transactions. You're quite right in saying, well, hang on, this is also caught by the asset disposal covenant. Answer, yes. Just as the merger structures are caught by a number of clauses, so is this one. You're absolutely right. The asset disposal covenant could control it as well. But the asset disposal covenant, generally speaking, is set at quite a high threshold. And therefore, these things fall below that usually in practice, and therefore you have a clause which extends the negative pledge to these types of transactions, which in total value exceed X $100 million. They need not, that figure need not be the same as the figure for the asset disposal covenant. That depends on what the banks want, what they feel comfortable with, and indeed what the borrower feels comfortable with. Okay, any other questions? Now I wanted to take you on to a type of negative pledge clause drafted slightly differently to the one I gave you. With the addition of the words in yellow. Borrower will not and will not procure that none of its subsidiaries will create, permit to subsist, mortgage, charge, lien, security interest on all or any part of the present or future undertaking or property or assets of any such corporate entity, meaning its subsidiaries. And then the clause is added in respect of any other borrowings or indebtedness. So the borrower's counsel usually says, well, hang on a minute, look, we can't just agree to a clause which prevents us from doing anything subject to your exceptions in the appendix. If you're concerned with security interest being granted because my client, the borrower, is going to be borrowing from banks and giving security, then why don't we just put it in and say in respect of any other borrowings or indebtedness? Sounds perfectly reasonable, doesn't it? Now, if you're sitting on the other side of the table, what would you think? Looks okay, yeah, it's fine. Or is usually this kind of question. Can we add this in, please? It's about 2:30 in the morning. You're falling asleep, not concentrating. They know that, and they say, how about adding this bit in, please? And you kind of think, God, I need to get home, I want to sleep. Oh yeah, that's fine. And what I want to do next is, what happens when you say that's fine? Yeah? I see. Your point is that in a sale and leaseback, there is no such borrowing. Therefore, it wouldn't apply. But you've already caught it. You've already caught the sale and leaseback in the extended negative pledge clause. In practice, you would expect to see an extended negative pledge clause covering a series of transactions specified in an appendix to the negative pledge clause, which the bank say these are transactions which we want to catch and prohibit given the business profile and the activities of the borrower. So you would have covered those if you're worried about sale and leaseback. I see what your point. I see your point. I see your point. You're saying, well, if you have this additional bit, it wouldn't catch the lease and leaseback type of transaction because there is no borrowing. You guys follow that point? Okay. In a sale and leaseback, as he rightly points out, there isn't a borrowing being effected. What you're doing is you're transferring an asset with a promise to repurchase it. There's no borrowing. There's a reality commercial borrowing, but not a legal borrowing. There's no legal provision which says there's a borrower and there's a creditor. So to that extent, that clause, adding these words would first have that impact. But on top of that, it also enables the borrower's lawyers to play wonderful games later. Yeah? By operation? It won't be borrowing, but is it indebtedness? Exactly. I think much of this, the phrase indebtedness, which again must be interpreted by reference to the governing law, would catch quite a number of things which are not bank borrowings. But the real danger is what you can do with this clause. And this is just one example. Let's say you are a syndicate lending to a corporate entity, your borrower, which is a parent company of a whole pile of subsidiary companies. One of the subsidiaries then goes ahead and borrows from a syndicate in Singapore, just to give an example. Because the borrower's credit standing is not strong enough, the bank says, sure, we'll lend to you, but only on the basis of the grant of security. The subsidiary is going to say, sorry, I can't do security because my parent is subject to a negative pledge clause which would prevent me, subsidiary, from giving you asset security. Then comes the clever way of doing this. You say, all right, don't give asset security, but let's do it this way. We make the loan to you, your parent company, that's to say, First Syndicate's borrower, gives a guarantee to the new set of banks relating to the subsidiary's borrowings. That's this one here. It's just a guarantee, still no security. But this time, the parent agrees to grant security over its assets or its borrower's assets, usually its assets, to this new set of banks, but to secure not the loan, but the guarantee. Now go back to the language. It's not, the grant of asset security is not given in respect of borrowings or indebtedness, it's given in respect of a guarantee. Consequently, this transaction would not breach the standard negative pledge clause, which contains those additional words. Moral of the story is that most of us refuse to give any qualifications to the standard language of the negative pledge clause. Where is it? I lost it again. There. No qualification. It's that blanket prohibition, and if you want to create exceptions, we will create it in the SLA. We're not going to put language in which enables borrowers' counsel to play games later. That's something that one needs to bear in mind negotiating the negative pledge clause. Now, some of you are doing negotiation courses. Do you cover stuff like this? Which is what we would train our associates to negotiate. How? Why? What do we do? That's negotiation for us, lawyers' negotiation. Is that what you cover? Don't know what you cover, but this kind of is what we call negotiation. In real life, lawyers' negotiation. How do you do it? What do you ask for? Why do you refuse it? Anyway, moving on. Do you follow this problem? I mean, this is just an example. I mean, there's endless examples I can give you. This is in the context of project finance, where the negative pledge in the SLA can be overcome by using project finance structures. But let's leave that for finance too, shall we? Deferred. Whole number of these things can be developed in order to avoid the negative pledge clause if you include those dangerous words in respect of borrowings and indebtedness. I mean, these are a whole pile of things. I'm not going to go through them because depending on how clever the borrower's lawyers are, you can have a whole number of these transactions which fall outside the negative pledge clause because you included the language prohibition in respect of borrowings and indebtedness. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that because I need to get on to something a little bit more important. How do you enforce this negative pledge clause? You got a question?
Yes. How does the bank know that this kind of transaction are good?
How does the bank know?
That this kind of transaction are doing by the
Well, first of all, anyone in the market knows that this kind of transaction is being effected. The question, therefore, is not what do you do when it happens, but do you allow the clause to be drafted in a way and agreed to in a way that enables someone to play these games. It's a preemptive strike, not an ex post facto attempt to solve a gaping wound. It's too late. The gap is now created. What I wanted to take you on to next is the enforcement of the negative pledge clause. I mean, the markets consider this clause to be absolutely fundamental. Bankers will not agree to anything, whether it's a bond, whether it's a loan, whether it's a derivative, without this negative pledge clause, in some form or another. So the next question is, how do you enforce a negative pledge clause? Well, usual answer is event of default. You breach your negative pledge clause. But then you have to think about one other thing. If you call a default on a breach of a negative pledge, because the borrower, in breach of its SLA obligation, has granted security, what happens next? The answer is on the board. You trigger a cross default. Everybody else will call a default. You trigger cross defaults across the board on all syndicated loans, bonds, and everything else of the borrower. What happens to the borrower? It goes into insolvency. And what happens in an insolvency? Under most corporate law systems? I'm trying to make you think practically. You've got to do this. It's not about learning the rules now. What happens? Exactly. The secured creditors have priority over you. So what the heck is the point of putting this borrower into insolvency? The secured creditors just walk away with the assets. Consequently, calling default is not a viable option because of the existence of cross-default clauses in every syndicated loan bond to which this borrower is a party. You're absolutely right. So it's not a great idea to go do it, because you end up in a self-defeating process. Borrower goes into insolvency, the secured creditors say, hello, bye-bye, we've got the assets. Therefore, we need to go back to the drawing board. How do we deal with this? I think we're running out of time. We've already got people walking in. Yes. Okay, done. Can I pick this up? I know you're all totally lost and fed up, so go away. Don't listen to lecture capture. Listening to me again, please. Do something else and try and understand what this is about and come back next week, okay? Any questions before I go? I'm just enough time for a couple of questions if you want it. Yeah.
I asked one just now, but it was about whether the SND protocol can not just the sale, but also a use for a license or some other product.
Any transfer of any asset above the threshold level will be called. If any transfer, doesn't matter that is not a sale. No. Oh, okay. I'm not saying anything to you. What is it you want to ask me? Recommendations for courses? I'm sorry, you got it. As I said, guys, out of this class, okay? Let's go. I'll talk to you outside. Let me just close this down. I can't talk. There's a lecture coming. I asked you guys, do you have any questions? And nobody had a question, so I'm done. Okay. Mine's up there. I'm trying to shut it down. Because otherwise it says, you shut it down without... Okay, there you go. Done. Walking, posting, sorry about that.
That's all right, no
Hopeless.
worries.
I'm sorry, I can't deal with it. Okay, can we go outside or elsewhere? Let's talk outside, okay? we can't talk here. Can we go outside? Lecture starting right here. Can we talk outside? So sorry.
Right.
Oh, hello. How are you? Sorry, I was expecting you. It's a nuisance. It doesn't accept OneDrive. It's blocked. It happened to me somewhere else. I mean, somewhere else. I think probably was a workshop.
Yeah.
So if you go via email, does it work?
Ah,
Try
well.
via email. I mean, I don't mind. I have a plan B, as you can see. So it's just avoiding viruses being transported and all that.
Ah, okay.
Anyway, how are you?
Good. You?
All right.
Yeah.
Surviving the cold. Right. Okay.
So if you could then- That's why I come. So let's see if it's working. Wait, wait, wait.
Yes, it's hopefully.
They might have a more stricter version because it's presentation computer mode.